Welcome to the Solid Verbal. And now, Dan and Ty.
Dan Rubenstein, welcome back to the show, my good friend. A little something different on today's episode. Am I right?
You are right. Everybody who has clicked to listen or view knows that Chuck Klosterman is coming on, author of the new book entitled Football. Longtime pop culture writer, has written about all sorts of things, has written fiction, but football has always been a big deal to him. If you've listened to him on podcasts, if you've read any of his books, and he is out and about talking about his new book, and we figured, and we knew this going in, that he's just a major college football head. And so I had listened to him on a number of different shows, and a lot of what he talks about is football as a sport and football as it's played in the NFL, but we wanted to, I think, dig deep on the college aspect of his brain. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of starting a little bit of a book club here. Now's the time to do it.
This is true.
It's the dead of the off season. It's cold. It's snowy. At least here it is. So if we're going to talk about bigger picture themes with big name authors and guests, now would be the time to do it. So I'm going to hold this up. You'll see it during the interview like 8 times. Yeah, there it is. But here's the book. It's got a nice little sheen to it. It feels very distinguished. I went through it this weekend. I picked it up on Friday and I ripped through the whole thing this weekend as it was snowing outside. It's a quick read. It's a lot of fun. And it's clear, not just that Chuck Klosterman is a football fan, not just that he's a college football fan, dude's a football sicko, which totally computes for you and I. Yeah,
it absolutely does. No, he's open and willing and enthusiastic about Maction on Tuesday nights. He has lots of thoughts about everything he's watched over the past, 40, 50 years. It's great. And I can't wait to get into it with him. And it evoked a lot of questions. It invoked a lot of opinions I didn't realize I didn't need to have, but opinions I was forming while reading the book. It's a really good read, even if it's just a few pages before bed or on the toilet or what. It's fast. It's great. And very excited to have him on.
I can't tell you how many times going through this, I sort of stopped, looked out the window as it was snowing, and ruminated on the words that I just read.
Yeah.
Which, in my opinion, is one of the signs of it being a good book. So I would encourage everybody to check it out. It's Football by Chuck Klosterman. We're going to talk through all of this, or at least as much as we can, over the next hour or so. If you're new here, welcome on in. Hit follow. Hit subscribe if you like what you hear. Twice a week, all throughout the offseason, Dan and I talking all things college football. Every now and again, take a little bit of a left turn, do something different. But this is, by and large, a college football show. We will continue on throughout the remainder of the offseason, at which point we'll switch it over to 3 a week once things get a little bit bigger in the window. Of course, going out to verballers.com if you want to directly support what Dan and I do out on our Patreon.
By the way, and on that note, Ty, this is just us. We don't have fancy producers behind the scenes. We don't have PAs. We don't have interns. No. We have a very, very dedicated group of listeners and viewers, but this nonsense is created exclusively by the two handsome gentlemen you are looking at or listening to right now. And so any support, even if it's just hitting that subscribe or follow, does go a long way. So
it does.
Yeah, we are. This is all elbow grease and chicken wire and duct tape and I guess diffuse light. It's good diffuse light, Ty. You look very good today.
It's a wonder that the duct tape and chicken wire is still holding after 17 years of doing the show. But here we are.
But yeah,
we made it.
This is what we do. This is we pour everything we have into it, whether it looks like it or it doesn't. So yeah, that's all.
All right, joining us now, he is the author of 12 books. He has written for everyone from Esquire to ESPN to New York Times Magazine. And just this weekend, while reading his book, I learned he was also a high school punter who averaged 42 yards per kick and practiced punting over a barn. Chuck Klosterman, welcome to the Solid Verbal. How are you?
It's great to be here, or there, however you look at it. Yeah.
42 yards per kick is not bad.
It's not nothing.
Yeah, it was interesting. There is a sort of a caveat to that, which is I did realize that a lot of high school kids don't want to field the ball. They will only want to field the
True.
ball if it's a high spiral. And if you kick a line drive, they will just let it go. So there is a bit of deception with that. I was not booming these Ray Guy kicks.
A rugby
I was,
style
you know,
kicker.
yeah. Well, no, I mean, not always, but
Okay.
I just realized that it's high school kids don't like fielding punts. They're not comfortable doing it, And we had a good punt coverage team. So
Yeah, and they didn't have the advanced metrics to measure your hang time.
Nobody would ever call a fair catch. The high school kids don't like calling
No,
fair
they don't.
catches. They're not comfortable with it. I mean, I can understand why. It's a complicated job when you're 16 or whatever.
Yeah.
And there's so much nuance now in the college punting game. All
Yes.
these different styles and formations, and we can get into some of the quirks, why college over pro, that type of thing as we go through here. But punting, I didn't plan for this, but punting is very much one of those things.
Yes, I mean, just the whole existence of the University of Iowa is like it's like a punting sort of hotbed. But also, the rugby style, guys from other countries who they take the 9 steps in one direction and then kind of kick almost in a soccer style fashion, directional punting and all that. And then but also in another sense, punting has become slightly less meaningful because teams go for it so often now. That having the punter who can really trap you in the old coffin corner, that doesn't come up very much.
Is that something
That's
you
like
enjoy?
Kind of a lost art.
Is that something you enjoy? The more going for it on 4th down?
Oh, I think everyone does, right? I mean, I think everybody, if you said, what are changes that have happened to football over the last 10 years? I think there would be very few people who would complain about teams' decision to constantly go for it on 4th down, even though at this point, I think it probably is at times detrimental because they're using the analytics of the past.
Right.
When the only time teams went for it on 4th down is when they had a clear advantage or they had to. So I think 10 years from now, I would not be surprised at all. In fact, I'll predict it that 10 years from now, there'll be a swing back where teams will be saying, we need to punt more. Punting actually is the better move if it's 4th and 2 at your own 40 or whatever. That will change.
The rebirth of Kirk Ferentz. He's coming out of retirement at that point to talk more about punting. So look, I've got the book. I held it up at the start of this, but it's a beautiful book. It says football. Plain and simple, football right on the front cover. You say in this book that it is not a love letter to football. It is also not fully an obituary to football. For me, this lives somewhere kind of in the creative space in between. I'm curious how you would describe this book, Football, your new book, just came out last month, how you would describe it to our listeners.
Well, I mean, so often when somebody, particularly if they're not a traditional sports writer, if they write a book about sports, say like when Spike Lee did a book about the NBA or whatever, you see this. Actually, it happens quite a bit with basketball and sometimes with baseball when George Will did his baseball book. They always get called a love letter to the game. And while I do love football, I'm not writing a fucking love letter to it. I don't want, that's not what, I don't feel like there's any, I have no desire to do this. And I don't think there's any need for someone to get a book that will sort of validate their deep emotional relationship to the game. The emotional relationship is there just by virtue of your existence and the game's existence. I think if I was describing what this book was, just, I've thought about football unconsciously for 45 years, and probably very sort of analytically and consciously for 20. And this is just my attempt sort of to describe sort of the complex but very profound relationship that I have with it and why it is so reflective of particularly the last half of the 20th century in the United States. I think that if somebody was trying to describe what the United States was like from 1950 to 2000, and they couldn't use current events, they just had to use an abstract idea, the evolution of football is probably the best choice. Now, I don't know if that will be the case moving forward in the 21st century, but certainly, for the lives that we kind of grew up in, and also just, football is always in some ways tied to the past. There is something sort of, traditional and conservative coded to it that you're always thinking about the past when you're thinking about football. It kind of pulls the past to the present. Yeah.
There is a line near the end of this book that really stuck with me. Quote, "It consumes too much of my memory and too much of my time. From late August until February, my whole life revolves around trying to see football games that carry No personal significance. If I didn't have a family, I'd watch 30 hours of football a week. An easy way to guarantee no new family would ever be created, end quote. We run a college football show here, Chuck. That line really hits pretty close to home.
Because it really is, the college game is the X factor in this. It's those MAC games.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the games on Friday nights now. It's my life is so much easier now that football's over. Like, I'm not happy that football's over.
Same.
So much easier now. I can do anything. My kid wants me to take him to play Magic the Gathering at some store on Sunday. I was like, I got unlimited time. Sure. Like, it's like, it is weird how football and my relationship to it, and I'm guessing for you guys too, and a lot of the people listening to this podcast, it almost does become like an anchor on our ability to do normal things. Because, and the maddening part is that it would be one thing if I was seeing these games and they were burned into my mind. But I watch these games and like 2 days later, sometimes I can't even remember what I saw, but I know that if the game on Tuesday I can't remember does not mean I don't want to watch the game on Thursday that I haven't seen yet.
I wonder, my question though is, given that statement, is that confession sort of the real thesis of your book? Not that football is dying, not that football is anything, but instead that it has consumed people like us in a way that's kind of unhealthy and indefensible?
I don't know. That's an interesting theory. I don't agree with it, but I can certainly understand someone reading that and taking that away. I mean, it's just sort of a way to, like, okay, so you're writing a book about football like this, and it's kind of a critical look, right? So I'm talking about things I love, but also a lot of the problems with it. And maybe I feared that there was a sense that I was somehow acting as though I was detached from all this, that I was looking at this, but I didn't really care, because I like to sort of see myself as sort of this Spock type figure who has no emotional relationship to anything. And it is disturbing to me how untrue that is with sports, but football in particular. It is a strange thing. Like, it is, I mentioned this in the book. It's like so often during the fall and winter, somebody will ask me, "Oh, we should go out. You're making a new friend with somebody,"
Right.
and I'll be like, "Oh, we should go out on Wednesday. I think I'm free Wednesday," and I have no idea. But I know that the likelihood of an interesting football game being on Wednesday is remote. Although even now there sometimes is.
Yes.
When I was growing up, there was never, like, you couldn't have high school football practice on a Wednesday because it was like church night or whatever. Now I very often will see like a big time high school game being played on a Wednesday, and it'll be on like ESPN2 or whatever. Because I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing you guys are the kind of guys who also watch those high school games sometimes when there's nothing else to watch, or the ones they show in August before the season starts, It's I like, someone asked me why I do it. I couldn't even say why, but I know that I do.
Yeah, I mean, but you're also, I think, unique in that you didn't grow up rooting for a huge college program because you had family ties, or because you went to a powerhouse program or a semi-powerhouse program, and you still seem to watch, especially college football, through the lens of, like, this is the best TV show ever, right?
Well, okay, that's true, but also just to
please jump in.
I mean, I kind of did, though, in a sense, because I grew up 65 miles south of Fargo,
Right.
And North Dakota State was covered like a major program by the local media. Like, they were still Division II at the time. They weren't even. I mean, now they're Division all the way up. They weren't even FCS. But it felt that way, So I guess I did have that relationship, but in the larger sense, what you're saying is true. I mean, the Vikings were the local team.
Yeah.
They were 3 hours away. I guess our family did follow Nebraska, which, because the Huskers weren't that far away, but yet that almost seemed more ideological.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my dad loved Tom Osborne. I love the option. My whole family loved the option. We had sort of like my dad and my brothers didn't like Oklahoma. They didn't like Barry Switzer and stuff. They kind of saw that as a really corrupt program. Right. So it almost like, people always point this out to me that I don't have this kind of like a relationship. Like, my friend Michael Weinrib grew up in State College.
Right.
Yep. So like that, his whole life is based around Penn State. Like, it almost, his dad worked there, and he has almost no memory of football that doesn't involve that. I don't have that. Like, I do have more sort of separation.
So what do you think you're missing now, if anything, or what do you think your advantage is now if you do have that separation and you are not, on an Oklahoma State message board at, 1 a.m. or you're not, looking at a recruiting class come together on a message board or something like that? Do you feel like you are missing something, or do you feel like you have a built-in advantage?
I would say the latter. And this came up more often when I was like, they say strictly like a rock critic and a film critic.
Mm-hmm.
People would say, like, is there an advantage to coming from this farm, from this tiny town in North Dakota? There was one advantage, which is that the only sort of media that got to me was mass media.
Right.
So I might be in a better position to say, write about something like Guns N' Roses or something, because it's like that to me was as interesting as culture got. It might work the same way a little bit with football, in the sense that I have always sort of viewed it through a national lens, which now has become the way most people follow sports. Like the regional quality, and the part of the reason now, and kind of ironically, why I care so much about college sports, it was that regional quality to me became more interesting as I got older. Like sort of the diversity between how teams on the West Coast played opposed to the SEC, right. and the sort of the interesting kind of kid who got recruited to play in the Big Ten as opposed to the Big 8 and the Big 12 and stuff. And that does seem to be kind of, I mean, I'm sure you guys talk about this all the time. Sure. It's like it's just kind of slipping away from us, but that did become at one point when I started having an awareness in a weird way that colleges meant more than just the sports team. Like for the longest time, if you'd asked me just like what's Syracuse University, I would have only known them as like a basketball team. I would have had no idea of anything else about the school. Then when you start learning about these schools and the kind of people who go there, that when you're watching a college game, if it's say Ole Miss and Mississippi State, in a sense, you're rooting for or against the kind of person you imagine going there. I mean, these are the things that make college sports so fascinating. And I fear that we're at the very tail end of that's just about over. And I don't know how I'm going to feel about it when that ends. But
there are people who make fun of fan bases for how they smell, right? There's like the LSU fans smell like corn dogs. I have no idea where it started. I have no idea if it's coded for something else, but that's like an active thing that people have opinions of. And I think it's interesting because I grew up the same way, that my parents weren't, huge fans of their alma mater's team. My dad went to a small college that I couldn't watch in Southern California, and my mom didn't care about college football. And so I was watching the national games, and I sort of treated it when I was, 11 years old or something, that I was sort of figuring out who these superheroes were, right? That when you're watching a Florida State team from the mid-90s or a Penn State team or a UCLA team, because that was local to me, that was the lens through which I grew to love the sport. And I'm wondering maybe who those superheroes were for you when you were growing up.
Can I ask, how old are you guys?
So I'm 42. Ty's a year or two old. How old are you now, Ty?
Yeah, okay. So
44,
I'm 53, and this is one of the weird situations where our age difference does actually probably play a role in this, because I can remember just before the big switch happened, and it was very difficult. Like there was 2 college football games a week usually, sometimes only 1. So I guess in some sense, if you didn't have that local relationship where the game was on the radio and you could like watch the coaches show, that was always like for North Dakota State, that was a big deal. On Sunday night, I would watch the 10:30 coaches show or whatever. But for the average, like for me, I would typically be, they'd show a Big Ten game, and then sometimes we'd get like a Pac-10 game or that Pac-12.
No, but I remember that. I remember having like a CBS game and maybe an ABC game.
And it was not ESPN. ESPN was just like auto racing and
workouts,
and hockey, and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, it's just the switch completely flipped. And then it was sort of everywhere. So in the early days of my memory of college football, I was heavily affected by the Heisman race. Like the Heisman race was a huge thing. Like I guess it's still, in some ways, it has hung on as kind of the one of these postseason awards that still does matter in a way a lot of the other ones don't anymore. Like, people talk a lot about who the NBA MVP is going to be and all this, there was a big dispute this year where like, should it be Stafford or Drake May? It's like, but nobody really cares about those in the same way, because they're not like, you can win those awards. Like Derrick Rose won MVP, and he may not. He probably will make the Hall of Fame, but I don't think he has yet. Whereas the Heisman almost made your career already. Like you had a successful career if that happened. So I used to follow that a lot. You'd get an issue of Sports Illustrated before the season that was like super thick, and it was half football and half pro.
Yeah.
And I would read that. The magazines were a big the guy Steele, his guide to football or whatever.
Phil Steele,
with the agate type. I think he works at Ohio. So are you asking me what guys specifically?
I assume that was sort of an entry point for you, because obviously aside from the North Dakota State and maybe Nebraska thing, if you are seeing a game or two games, it's probably like, okay, this running back is exceptional or this linebacker is everywhere.
For me, the period, like the Heisman race between Herschel Walker and John Elway, I have a lot of memory of that those, and it was so odd how it was covered in the people would say well, John Elway probably can't win the Heisman because nobody can see the games on the West Coast. And nobody thought that was that shocking.
Right.
That would be so unacceptable now. If some guy said he didn't vote for somebody who played for Oregon or whatever, and he's like, well, the games are on so late. That would be, it was completely acceptable not to have to see everything. You could just follow it through these other means.
But that was a thing even more recently than I think people realize. And
Christian McCaffrey,
right.
They said that about Christian McCaffrey.
Carson Palmer. Carson Palmer's another one that comes to mind.
And then there was just oddities when Oklahoma State was on probation, you never saw Barry Sanders play,
right?
But you could follow him statistically, and the statistics were just bonkers, So it was you were almost imagining what these games would have been like. That was a big part of it. In general, it was reading about these guys, seeing the occasional highlight, maybe never seeing a game they played until the bowl season, but sort of imagining what they were, imagining what the game was like. We would go out, at recess or whatever, and play that we were these guys that we never actually saw. It was very bizarre, but it happened all the time, where there would be some quarterback that we were just all fascinated by, but it was never on television.
Right.
So we just sort of imagined what he was like.
Do you remember, by the way, who owned the sort of preseason All-American list? Do you remember the big outlet that was these are our preseason?
Playboy was
Playboy.
A big one. Yeah.
That's where we were in the mid-90s.
So I was a kid, so I couldn't actually see
right.
it. But then the paper would list who's on there, And then it was interesting. The beginning of the year, it was Playboy. The end of the year was Bob Hope.
Yes.
Bob Hope
would bring them out.
Bring them all out. And it was sort of it was a strange sort of, it was a nudity or a guy who was popular in the 40s.
Yeah. Yeah. It's terrific.
The other component to this, Chuck, is the weird rivalries and traditions that college football has. And I mean, we're biased here, obviously. We're pro the college game as opposed to the NFL. But, we talk about guys as if superheroes. We talk about quirks in punting, but truly the traditions, and we can say pageantry if we want, but that aspect of college football, at least for us, I think is what truly gives it a soul, and why, in our view, it is better than the pro game, which maybe is a little bit more buttoned up, a little bit more corporate. We have taken emails about this countless times over the years, but I'm curious to get your thoughts comparing the college and the pro game. What is the biggest difference for you, and which do you prefer?
Okay, so when I was growing up, this is true for football and for basketball. Definitely when you listen to older guys talk, like my dad, my older brothers and their friends and stuff, it was definitely seen as more sophisticated to be into college sports. They kind of saw pro sports for kids. This was really true in basketball, but also true in football. It just seemed like the football games mattered more. And it's very strange why that is, because it's now, say my kid comes in and I'm watching a game and he's the game's over and he's they were playing for a jug.
Mm-hmm.
Why were they playing? It's it's a hard thing to describe if you aren't born into it. It was just there was all that stuff playing for jugs and anything weird, a hatchet, whatever, a statue of a pig or whatever like that.
Mm-hmm.
I love all those things, right? But they now do seem very archaic and very distant, because the world that we live in now, it's the idea of having a good year and winning a bowl game could get your coach fired. You're supposed to get to the playoffs and win the national title. That's the only thing that matters. So the idea that somehow a game for a jug matters does seem crazy to any modern person. But college football is not for modern people.
Right.
College football is for people who are still kind of living in the past, in the best possible way. Not nostalgic necessarily, because nostalgia is like injecting your emotion into something and getting a false meaning. It's just like, it was interesting when sports were that way, where it was, that we just sort of accepted the possibility that if the best teams in the country, if one was in the Big Ten and one was in the SEC, they just weren't going to play each other. They were going to go to the Rose Bowl and the Sugar Bowl, and then we just have to talk it out, know? And even if you lost the argument, you kind of won. It was almost like you could feel as though felt like there was more success to be shared because there were other ways to be successful. There was also just this sense, I don't know how, this is a weird thing to say, but part of me feels, or always felt strange, especially as I got older, where I was watching a guy if I'm watching the NFL, like he's in his mid 30s, he's a millionaire, and he's still doing something that's kind of like a kid's game, and he's being controlled by his coach, and his coach is sort of like, he's dealing with men. Like, something about the age that college football players are seems so much more sensible to me in a weird way. Now, this is changing because with all the NIL money and all this and the portal stuff, I mean, I don't know, I'm guessing that you guys probably discuss this. I don't listen to you every time, so I would guess you talk a lot about the portal and the NIL stuff. And I don't know what is your macro take on that in general? How do you feel about those two things? If somebody said, give me your 2 sentence take on this.
There are two things being true at once, right? That it's sensible that with all the money in the sport that players are able to participate, right? That they're able to participate, be it with revenue sharing from TV deals or be it from, NIL deals, which were obviously like, I don't know if this was your word in your book, but it was like those the concept of NIL was perverted almost immediately by collectives.
Instantly. Yeah.
And
like, it's not sensible now. I would say the way it works now, sensible is not a word I would use.
Right. And so I think the thing that is bad for the sport is not necessarily that players can participate and make money, be it off of commercials or just are able to capitalize on their value or whatever. It's that there's a nomadic nature to so many players that you don't feel the same. I don't feel the same kind of connection if I'm rooting for, I root for the Oregon Ducks, and that their defensive line has a guy from Houston, has a guy from South Carolina, has a guy like those schools, the University of Houston, the University of South Carolina, Michigan State or something. And then they're there for a year and then they're off to the NFL. And I always appreciate, and I think this about college basketball too, is like when a guy's there for a few years and you get to know who he is, who he isn't, like, oh man, this huge offensive line is going to run over this, shorter, speedy defensive end who's like a pass rush specialist. And so it's a bummer. It's a bummer to me that the names come and go so frequently.
It almost seems like we should no longer use the term program when discussing these institutions. Because there's no way you can have a program if it's going to be completely reinvented every season.
Right.
I follow Notre Dame, and I just get this sense that going forward, every year, it's going to be a graduate level quarterback coming from a school that has some sort of kind of like academic foundation that seems reasonable, Wake or Duke or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's just how it's going to be now. Like, it won't be every single year, but most years it does seem odd. I even more so, like, the NFL has way more stability now than college sports, obviously. And that is just makes, I don't know. I hate that.
So the thing that I wonder about, and we talk about, and Ty, feel free to jump in here, is on a certain level, if college football wants to be the most mainstream possible sport it can be, right? Turning itself over to TV money and expanded playoffs and expanded conferences, all in the name of TV money. The fact that it's a sport that you kind of have to know how NIL works. You kind of have to know how the transfer portal works. You kind of have to know how the playoffs expanding or not expanding work, and what the committee's job is, and how the playoff is structured, and then how recruiting works, how the portal works, when all of this happens, that there are 2 signing days, right? There's a barrier to entry with college football that's extremely high. On a certain level, I think it's a bug, right? That it's hard to sort of teach a new fan how this sport operates. And then on a certain level, it's a feature because it rewards you if you're enough of a dork to really dig into it, like anything. Like, right, if you're a fan of European soccer, if you're a fan of a band, if you're a fan of, like you said, Magic the Gathering, it rewards you for putting in the time. So feature or bug is my question to you.
Well, that's a good point, actually. Because there is, I guess, almost like this kind of perverse enjoyment into knowing how these things are working out. I mean, like, but at the same time, it's like, okay, is it rewarding to know that like Northern Illinois is now in the
Mountain West
or whatever, and like Sacramento State is joining the MAC? I guess it is. What the changes happen so often, though, that it's almost like I've been trying to think of what an equivalent would be. That you keep learning things and the information immediately changes. I mean, conference realignment, maybe it was the biggest element of this or whatever.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
I remember one year when like Boise State was considering joining the Big East. And it was like, the East is truly big if it includes Idaho or whatever.
TCU joined the Big East for a week.
That doesn't even seem weird. We don't even factor that in.
Yeah.
Like, we don't, like, you would never hear someone say, like, it is bizarre that SMU is on the Atlantic coast. I mean, technically, I guess but, you know, or like Cal or whatever. Like, we've just given up on that. Like, the idea that somehow geography matters at all. And so you see, like, could that be a feature? Could it be more? Could you look at it and say, like, well, this is more interesting now because every year it's like we're reshuffling the entire deck. I guess that, I mean, I don't feel that way, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm right about this.
I think it's more of a feature.
But all these things, it's like change is inevitable.
Yes.
But it rarely feels good. Like, even if the change is positive, if you're really used to something and you like something, like the change for like it with baseball, for example, like it was a great World Series this last year. That was, I think, the first time when there was sort of a kind of a collective kind of Catholic recognition that's like, oh, I guess that pitch clock really was smart. Like, it really did change everything. It made, like, it took a bunch of years to realize that. There might be a time when you're saying what you're saying is true. It might become that like college football becomes this thing only for the obsessive,
right?
Like only for the person who won. But it's tough because there's also an element of college football that really appeals to the person who only knows one thing, which is that, like, I root for the Tennessee Volunteers.
Right.
That's the whole thing. That's all they know. They don't want to follow anything else about this. Now, if we get to this point, which I think is inevitable, where the kids playing won't even have to go to the schools. I know this is going to happen.
Right.
Where it's like Tennessee's quarterback just represents the Volunteers. You know, he's a paid employee or whatever. Will this person who is just sort of like kind of reflexively roots for the Volunteers because they grew up outside of Knoxville or whatever, will they keep going? I think college football is sort of banking on the fact that they will. That person is not that, I don't want to say not that discerning, but like won't necessarily see a huge difference between, you know, Auburn just giving a guy a contract and like whatever it was for Brent Fullwood or whatever he was getting when he was there. You know, they were like, well, it was corrupt then. Now it's just like transparent.
I think we're already kind of there with the portal, right? If a guy shows up in March and he goes to school from August until December, then declares, right, if it's one final season at Florida State or at Oregon or Notre Dame, that, you know, was it Steve Smith? I don't want to get this wrong. Maybe it was Chad Johnson at Oregon State. Like, he was there for 10 weeks or 14 weeks and he didn't go to class. He didn't need to stay eligible. And then he went to the NFL. And so I think it's just formalizing some of that.
Didn't the quarterback from Miami say that like before?
Yeah, they graduated 2 years ago.
Basically, he's like, I'm not going to class. What are you talking? Like,
right.
Like he almost seemed like it was an absurd question. And in some ways, it was an absurd question because if he had said like, well, yeah, you know, I have psych on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from like he'd have been like, well, who cares?
Right.
Like it's not though you're going to apply this to your career.
I think people will say in April that it has ruined college football for them if they're no longer students, and then come Saturday in September, they'll watch and root.
Well, it is fascinating in the sense that, like, okay, so in the short term, like Indiana winning the national title this year. I would say in the short term, that was good for the sport. It was interesting. It was surprising. Everybody knew one of these teams, one of these schools was going to really take advantage of the portal NIL stuff. I did not think it would be Indiana. That would not have been my guess,
Right.
But it did. For the people of Indiana, I'm sure it was incredibly amazing, and that's also by chance the largest, I think, alumni base in the country. Mm-hmm. So it almost worked out perfectly. But I don't know if I could like look into a crystal ball and it'll be like, here are the next 25 teams who are going to win the national title. And it's like, oh, Liberty. Oh, like North Carolina State. It's like, I don't think I would be jacked about that. Because in a sense, there is sort of, for me, like an intellectual security in the sense that like, well, there'll be down years, but Texas will always be good. Florida will always be good. Georgia will always be good. USC will always be good. And it was almost, now like the idea of say Indiana winning the national title in say 1988, that would have been an insane thing. It would have been so insane. It's like, it almost doesn't seem that it could possibly happen. Now anyone can win, really, literally anyone could win if they put enough money into it and their coach and or whatever, you look at their GM or whatever term they're using, is a good enough evaluator of talent. Any school could do that. I don't know. That seems, I realize that's more democratic or whatever, but it also seems much less meaningful and romantic.
Well, and it's also sort of a contrarian view of where I think maybe the national narrative has gone, at least amid the emails that we see coming into us, though so much of the talk is about the Indianas, the Vanderbilts, schools like that have found a way to sort of rise up and either win the national championship or be on the cusp of the playoffs. There is certainly a romanticism about that people gravitate towards and want to write to us about. But I think what you are speaking to is also the need for blue bloods.
Well, not just that, but what you're talking about, those emails, I'm sure you're getting them. It's weird. It's like they're sending you emails about the present as if it is still the past.
Right.
That it is incredible to think of Vanderbilt challenging for the SEC, but why would that be the case now? I mean, like, there was a time, and I've said this on other podcasts, where it's like, there's a kid being recruited, and Nick Saban or wherever goes into his kitchen and talks to his parents and says, like, look, like your kid might not play right away. He might just play on special teams when he was a sophomore. I'm going to be tough on him in a way that you can't, but I'm going to make him into a different kind of person. And he's going to have this experience at the University of Alabama that's special. And just by virtue of being on this team, it will be meaningful. And that could still happen today. But then the parent would just say like, well, okay, but Vanderbilt's offering him $560,000 right away. Like, what's your number? So then it doesn't mean anything. That like the tradition of these schools is almost just in the mind of the person who still wants to pretend that this hasn't changed. I mean, I know that in some ways it's like what I'm saying might seem like too pessimistic. And in a sense, because what's happening on the field didn't change that much. Like the games on the field were still, to me, as good this year as any of the past 10 or whatever. Like, so that product maybe isn't being. And maybe that's all that really matters. As long as the product is the same, all this other stuff is just like what we talk about. But I don't know.
Chuck, one of the fears you speak to in the book is that football will decline the way horse racing did. Mm-hmm. Once people lose their personal connection, which I think we're speaking to on some level with college football, with football in general, that is when maybe we could see the sport bottom out a little bit, right? So like, as I said, we can't even put a number on how many emails we've gotten about this topic. It's obviously been very popular amid conference realignment and NIL and the transfer portal, and we won't even bring playoff expansion into this. But let's assume you are right about this. Let's assume that football takes on the same trajectory as horse racing did back at like the turn of the century. Which side bottoms out first? Is it college or is it the NFL?
I think probably college. I mean, first will be high school, and then it will be college. And then they'll find a way, the NFL will find a way to sort of keep itself sort of, like robust. Like if they have to start, if it becomes like this European model where they have to have camps for these kids, or it's like, the players will only come from certain parts of the country But in those parts, football will just be like a factory-like machine. And the NFL will still find a way to be able to put a product on the field that, as far as we are concerned, is as good or even better than the past, because the athletes are getting better, their training is better, their technology is better. But I think that the idea of playing high school football will become a rarity unless you live in certain states. As a consequence, college football will just sort of become like a semi-pro version of the NFL. It'll be almost indistinguishable, because that's, I think, probably for guys like us, one of the things that we kind of fear, which is that if this happens, college will look like the NFL, where almost everyone runs the same sets. Almost everyone runs versions of the same plays. And that the idea that there's just this, somebody like, Paul Johnson playing Mike Leach or whatever, like that could never happen. That we'd never have this kind of conflict. So then I do think that the interest in college football would then almost only become like a manifestation of like, well, everybody at my school goes to these games and we care about it or whatever. But it's like it would almost be like a social experience. So I do think that probably like the NFL will be the last version of football that is still sort of the center of the monoculture. That will be the last thing, because they will do whatever they can to keep that alive, and they will have the sort of financial support to kind of create that illusion or sensation.
The first chapter in your book, I'm going to hold it up again, because I like the cover of it. Very distinguished looking, Chuck.
Yeah, well, it's supposed to look like the old book from football from the late, like the Walter Camp book from the end of the 19th century. That's the idea.
No, there's definitely a nostalgic quality to it. I love it. The first chapter is about TV, and you speak at great length about how football as a TV sport is almost unmatched, that it happened by accident. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem as though they engineered it specifically for television, but in nearly every sense, football is better on TV than it is watching at least the game in person. Obviously, the atmosphere, the crowd, the tailgating, all that stuff is kind of in a class unto itself. But I found it super fascinating the way that you went through and described how football kind of stands on its own relative to its peers in the sports world, just with respect to how it is portrayed through like popular media.
Well, I mean, it really is. And it is accidental. Obviously, football starts after the Civil War. TV didn't exist yet. When they were introducing TV, they did see it as a way to show sports, although primarily boxing and baseball. Those were the two big ideas. But the way football works, with the stoppages of play, but with the intensity when the play is actually happening, sort of this view of the game that we've all sort of been socialized to accept, even though it's not the best possible view, for all these things that are, I think, in many ways unconscious. Football is just ideal for television. And, I think what's things unique about it is so many of the other sports, when they show a game on TV, what they're trying to do is translate what the live experience feels like. Right. Like they're trying to make it feel as though you're there in some way. But football doesn't do that. Like when you watch football on television, they're not trying to trick you into this experience. Like, well, this is kind of what it feels like to be there. You're watching a mediated event. Like that is what it is. And the idea, like, this came up. I wrote a book 10 years ago and they were already talking about this. Like, they were talking about bowl games, and they'll be like, the Music City Bowl or whatever. And the attendance will be just abysmal. But then the ratings number on TV will still be good. I mean, because it's like, it's December 27th or whatever. What are you going to do? You're going to watch these games or whatever. So there was this idea that in the future, could there be a bowl game with no audience, but the entire stadium is basically made into a studio?
Right.
So it's just limitless cameras, limitless sightlines. The whole thing is only a TV experience. Now that seems real dystopian. It seems really weird. It seems like something that they would do during the pandemic.
Right, like the NBA did it, yeah.
And yet I could see it happen. I could see that happening. And if it were to happen, I would be extraordinarily curious to watch it. If they were like, this football game is existing only for television, that it wouldn't exist at all if not. I would be intrigued by that.
So what experience about the modern game on TV to you would blow your mind as a 14-year-old?
Oh, like
Skycam. The Skycam.
You got Skycam. You got the first down line, you've got the score bug, you got a million things.
Well, when I was 14, something like the Sky Cam would really be mind blowing because that actually predates like Madden and stuff.
Yeah.
So that view, the idea was sort of the only people getting that view were coaches. They were the only people who were, filming from the from the end zones or whatever. That would be part of it. I mean, the main thing would just be the accessibility of it. I mean, just the amount of football games I could have, because it's like when I was young, I watched every minute of football I could that was available.
Mm-hmm.
So I would watch the college games when they were on. I would go to the high school game on Friday. I would watch the college games that were on, 1 or 2 on Saturday. Then I would watch the early game, which was the Vikings for me usually. The late game, which was either Dallas or Denver if it was the AFC affiliate, and then half of the Monday night game before I went to bed. The idea that I could just watch football basically, I mean, there's a stretch where there's a football game on every day, I think for 32 days. Or something like this?
Yeah. Late in like November,
There's a football game on every single day for 32 consecutive days on television. I'm not sure. I wonder if, in a weird way, I do worry if it would have meant less to me. If I would have been like, well, I'm not watching today, I'm going to watch the A-Team or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's like, I was never, like, there was nothing I would watch instead of football when it was on when I was young, because it was the idea that there's only so many chances to see it. Like waiting to see the NFL today, I would just wait, but that maybe that, and that could even be part of this, like lacking the relationship that I'm talking about. I guess it really is in a sense. Like what I'm mostly talking about how is, it's not just that people don't necessarily play football anymore, because most people don't, but it was like that they don't even have a friend who does, and their dad didn't, and like their grandfather maybe even didn't. Like the idea of knowing a football player, having football in your life, the idea that the quarterback is your most popular kid in your school, that's not how it is now.
Right.
I mean, it is at some schools, but at a lot of schools, that is not how it is. That the idea of being the quarterback or whatever is no longer like proof of your success or whatever. But it's also this idea that football now, to a lot of people, looks just like another reality TV show. It's just something that's on. You can watch it at any time. You can follow it all day. You can follow it none at all. You can catch up instantly. Like it's very easy. Like you can miss a weekend of football if you're traveling or something, and it takes you an hour to get everything because it's just so easy. Like maybe that does create this chasm where it matters less to people because the scarcity is gone. But at the same time, what am I supposed to say? Like, I wish it was scarcer. I don't.
Right. So one of the things I wondered in reading the book is you talk about how football is so obviously better on TV than in person, just because of sight lines and comfort, and how it's a slower game than it appears, or it's a more difficult game to see, depending on where you're sitting in a stadium. I think college is different than pro football, and I think a lot of it has to do with, people tailgate, people will catch up with old friends, they'll meet up once a year, and they'll go to a Clemson game or a Texas Tech game or something, and it's a social community thing. And then when you're inside of a stadium, like I went to Penn State to watch the whiteout game this year, Oregon-Penn State, and it was the most electric thing I had seen in a football stadium because of I'm surrounded by people and everybody's wearing the same thing. And then you have the drum major coming out and doing the flip. And, it's a frenzied atmosphere. At the same time, Ty got caught in a 30-minute long wave of people trying to get back from the bathrooms, right? There's like the pros and cons. This is a long-winded way of asking, have you had a good experience at a college football game?
Oh, definitely.
Okay, just making sure.
There are 100 reasons to go to a football game live.
Yes.
That are very great reasons. One of them just can't be to see the game better.
Right, totally.
Like if somebody's like, I want to go to this game, I really want to see what happens in this game, I want to go. That doesn't really make sense. But I went to Oregon State. It was a blowout a few years ago. It was still fun.
Yeah.
Going to those NDSU games, especially the playoff games, when it would be like just the wind chill would be like 40 below. The conditions were awful, and that's in my mind that made it a much more meaningful thing.
Yeah.
I don't want to somehow suggest that it's dumb to go to a live football game. I want to go see Ole Miss play there. I want to go see, like you say, they smell like corn dogs, but I want to go to Death Valley.
Oh, it's incredible. Yeah.
But it's just this has more to do almost just with me as a personality. Like I like records more than I like concerts.
Sure.
I would much rather listen to an artist in my house than go to a show. Like the sense of community that you're talking about, I know is very important to people. I don't share it. I'm not that kind of person. I like being by myself in a lot of ways,
Right.
or with this very small group of people. I don't enjoy crowds, not because I'm afraid of it. I don't have any kind of phobia. I just don't enjoy that experience as much. A lot of times when I go to a sporting event, it's bizarre. Like I go to Blazers games here quite a bit. And sometimes I find myself being like, I'm glad I'm here. I kind of wish it was done. Or I kind of wish we were toward the end. I wish we were in the last 4 minutes of the game or whatever.
Right.
And now someone could listen to that and be like, see, he doesn't really like sports. The thing is, I do like the sport. I do not like siding.
Right. Fair enough. I agree with all of it. I think, yeah, we don't get to go to games too frequently. So it's actually like a rush of being, human and social when we're able to, because we have to. This is our jobs. This is our work, that we watch this and talk about it all the time and obsess over it. So it actually adds a more human element when we're able to go to games.
I'm curious though, for you guys doing this podcast, how do you handle the watching? Like, do you watch all the big games and then tape this minor one? Like if there's a ton of, because you have to talk about all of this stuff, right? So if there are, or you just follow them the way you would in life, you just flip around, and if you just, if the CBS game is the best game, that's what you watch, and if it's not, you go to Fox One. Or like how do you manage to see all these things? And then, because you need to have an opinion about that's informed.
Right.
At least I'm lucky. I don't have to have an informed opinion about these things. I can just have an opinion because I'm just a guy.
So we're recording our reaction show at midnight Eastern the day of. And I think we try to do a decent job of telling people we watched as much as we could to try and form opinions. But we're not, digesting with an extra 24 hours to scrub through a bunch of games. How I try to do this, and I think Ty is similar, is we try to watch as much of the big games as they're happening as possible. I have YouTube TV, so I just set up, a DVR recording for everything, and I could just hit the forward button between snaps. What it takes away is, one of the appeals of football is the sort of drama between plays, and
it kind of becomes a job.
It becomes a job that way.
Yeah.
And it's just like, where I gotta, and no one. That's why, like, recording sports events in general, it's so unsatisfying.
It's so unsatisfying
compared to recording anything else. And it is a weird thing, because it's like there is part of you in your mind that's always saying, like, I could just find out what happened here.
Mm-hmm.
I could just find out what happened here. I could just go to the end, But you're trying to recreate the experience of what it's like to watch it, and yet then it seems idiotic to be watching commercials. It just seems stupid, or even just when the game slows down, to like, so you find yourself kind of skipping possessions. Somebody gets up 11, so you're like, well, I'm going to see if the score changes in 10 minutes or whatever.
There are like 20, 25 minute YouTube edits that are up pretty quickly. So you know what I'll do sometimes, and again, I think Ty does this too, is I'll go to a team site blog, not like an official thing. Like I'll go to like a Minnesota blog where they're like, okay, Minnesota just beat Nebraska. And I'll look at the comments, and I won't form an opinion based on the comments, but then I'll say, like, if they're saying, okay, the linebackers were garbage, but thank God we have this running back and this incredible play by this tight end, should be remembered forever. Then when I go back and go through the Minnesota game, even if it's quickly, I can pay attention to those kinds of things. And that sort of gives me a table of contents going in. So that helps.
The other thing, Chuck, and I've done this for years, I'll go back, I'll do the rewatch just as Dan described, but I like to condition myself first by reading the write-up from the losing team's beat writer. Because the winning team, it's always, puppy dogs and ice cream. But the losing team's going to be a little bit more cynical, whoever writes that capsule. And that tends to give me like a little bit more of a caustic view of the game before I hit the play button. I've done that for years. That's always given me the best indication of how the game actually went.
Well, that's interesting you guys say that. The comments thing too is intriguing to me, because a lot of people like follow the news that way now.
Right.
Like they go to a New York Times story, and they just read the comments, because you can then triangulate what the story must be.
Mm-hmm.
Like you'll be like, if everybody is claiming the story has a certain bias in it, you're like, well, I don't know if that's necessarily true, but that's how the perception is. So that means that's what it is. Like if the perception is that, and you can kind of figure it out without even consuming the actual thing. But that's also dangerous.
Totally.
I mean, that's what, I mean, a lot of the things, like we watch like talking head stuff on, ESPN or whatever, when guys are talking about these things, sometimes it's very clear to me that they are describing their reaction, which is a secondhand description from someone else. Like some spotter told them this, and then they boiled it down in a way, and they'd be like, well, you wouldn't actually have said that if you watched this game. That wouldn't be the main thing you would feel. But like, because that was the thing the guy mentioned that to you was the most intriguing, it now kind of becomes the story of the game. I guess it's not like the end of the world, but
no, it's an impossible task, and it's especially going through games quickly, right? Then you miss an injury, and you're just like, I don't know why this player isn't on the field, or I don't know what this penalty was, and you have to go back and figure it out. And it robs you of the emotion of the game and what we want to do in the games that we can watch the most of. We can say things like, I don't understand why they gave up with 2.5 minutes left and they were down 10 and they had opportunities. And that's one of those things that, because there are so many games and because there are so many fans of so many different teams, it's impossible to hit. And so we'll try to watch things going into Sunday and Monday and talk about them more during the week. But no, it's really tapping into the emotion of the sport is so much more important to us than tapping into the like, okay, Tennessee didn't win because they couldn't stop the run. Like that, fans already know that. So it's like, how did we feel watching Tennessee's defense? Why was it inexcusable that they were, 1 of 13 on third downs? And that's difficult unless you sit and watch the slowness of football.
Well, it's difficult even if you did watch it.
Right.
Like football is a very complicated game, and sometimes it's very difficult. You can watch an entire game and to say a team couldn't stop the run.
Right.
And we're all well versed enough to know the team couldn't stop the run. But then I said, well, why couldn't they? I often like, well, I don't know. I mean, like, Bill Belichick one time was like getting interviewed after a game, and he was like, well, I won't really know this until I watch the tape or whatever. He just watched the game from the sideline. He's like, well, we won't really know until we go to the film room. And the reporter said, like, well, what percentage of value can you get from just watching it? And he said 1%.
Yeah.
Like, he, as the coach, the brilliant mind, from watching the game from the sideline, he feels he gets a 1% understanding from seeing it live. Well, where does that put guys like us then?
Yeah, and
what are we supposed to,
and that's why I was like, how do I view this game through the lens of being a Mississippi State fan, right? How would I feel if I were a South Carolina fan, if I were a Cal fan, that it's so frustrating that this quarterback keeps throwing, to this terrible receiver, or this offensive coordinator keeps calling runs when they clearly can't block. Kind of that's how we try to view it, because at the end of the day, like, I don't know about Ty. He's never been an offensive coordinator for a major school. I've never been, a zero technique nose tackle. So we just have to do our best to approximate the emotion of what it must be like.
But, that's even what you're describing is very hard. I mean, obviously, like if you listen to Paul Feinbaum's show, some of the callers that you see, like you try to get in the mind of the Mississippi State fan, like there isn't like a collective fan.
No.
If you're like you watched Oregon, right? So I live out here. People love the Ducks and all this, but it's not the way it is in other places.
No,
it just isn't at all. Like it's like, so they're like they you don't want to say like they care less. They just care differently in a way that manifests itself as caring less, Whereas like a Mississippi State fan, like, when's the last time they were really good? I mean, it was like when they had Dak Prescott, they weren't that good or whatever, and yet their fan base still sort of consumes that team the way the fan from Georgia does. And that's like a unique thing or whatever, that's how a school like, or this is like the regional thing again. It's like sort of, like a fan of Arizona or Arizona State, how different that is than a fan of Michigan and Ohio State. Even if those 4 teams, if there was a season where they were very comparable in terms of their potential, what they had and stuff, it's still different. I mean, and that's the thing that I think we probably all like.
Yeah,
about this.
definitely.
His name is Chuck Klosterman. Again, here is the book. It's called Football. It's a quick read. I read it this weekend.
Yeah.
Come for the football discussion. Stay for the reference on page 163 to Brian Kelly as the jerk father in the 1933 Laura Ingalls Wilder book, Farmer Boy.
Yeah.
That was a personal favorite of mine, Chuck. Hopefully we can bring you on again sometime soon.
Anytime.
Best of luck with the book.
I'll come on this podcast anytime.
Oh, man.
We appreciate it. Great to have you.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Again, that is Chuck Klosterman, the author of Football.
Yes.
Many books, 11 other books, but Football is this latest one. I don't know if you made it to 163 yet in the book.
did. Oh, I read the whole book, Ty. The fact that you went and ID'd the part where I think it was an episode about a little girl falling into the ice, like the icy waters, right? And the dad on, it was Little House on the Prairie, right? The dad on Little House on the Prairie yelled at her, who almost died. I forget if it was a boy or a girl. And the reason the father did that was like, this is a dangerous world on the frontier, and you have to be vigilant, and you can't be doing stuff like that. It did have echoes of Brian Kelly.
The book, it was the 1933 Laura Ingalls Wilder book, Farmer Boy. When I saw
Farmer
the
Boy,
reference
excuse
in
me.
here, I almost died. That killed me. And especially when he made the turn into the father in real life in a college football sense is Brian Kelly.
Totally.
The jerk father who you need and who everybody, who has grown up with football recognizes this character
Yeah.
in the plot of Football, where the coach is scarier than falling in the icy water, right? The coach makes it scarier than the mistake you commit. You need guys like that. I guess they're ones that play a central role in all of this, but he did a really good job. And the other thing about this book, not to drone on too long about it, but that's why we're all here. There is an index in the back. I'm holding it up for the camera right now. There's an index in the back. And if you go through here, I mean, the random topics that are covered in this football book, we've got Tecmo Bowl, TED Talks, obviously like supermoto cycling racing, of course, Texas Christian University. This is just one page. It is quite literally everything that you can imagine, and football's ties to it. It was a really, really good read. Chuck did an awesome job with this book. I'm thrilled we had him on the show at long last.
So what did you think about, right? Because a lot of the book is about, what makes football unique, what makes it mainstream, whatever. Like, what were the things, because you probably, maybe I'm just projecting this onto you, but I imagine you probably you thought about your own football fandom.
Oh, my God.
And I'm wondering what went through that super advanced, that brain of yours, Ty.
Super advanced. Thank you.
Yeah.
The thing that resonated the most with me was, and this is probably because we've just been inundated with these emails over the last couple of years about people worrying about the decline of football, which is something he speaks to at length in this. And again, his whole fear is if people lose their personal connection to the game, that's when things start to come off the swivel a little bit.
Right.
And, that takes on a whole bunch of different meanings within a football and a college football sense. But thinking through some of those possibilities, having the context of the hundreds of people literally who have emailed us about this very topic, it really did have me looking out the window, wondering, okay, is this possible? Is this something we could see happening? He is not arguing that football is going to go the way of the dinosaur in the next 20 years.
Right.
And part of what makes this, as I think he told, or as Dan Lebitard told him in an interview that he did a couple weeks back, part of the beauty of making a prediction like this is that you're not going to be alive to see it. Right. So this is way off in the future, but it did make me wonder a little bit, living through all of these rapid changes in the sport, if this is the trajectory that the sport is headed on. Like, how quickly will we get to a point where a critical mass of people truly feel like they don't know college football anymore, and then they decide to bail?
Right. No, it's all intriguing, and everything sort of made sense to whatever degree you think as it resonates in your head. But yeah, nothing lasts forever. Nothing grows forever. There's no eternal growth for any company, any sport, any entity whatsoever, any band, any actor, whatever. So I don't think it's a hot take that football's place in society will someday change, and it can only pretty much go in one direction at this point. And so, yeah, college football it seems to be undergoing a lot more change than the pro game, and so that's probably what is going to continue to change for better or for worse. As I don't think there's ever going to reach a point in college football where we're in 2032 and we have a 16-team playoff or a 24-team playoff, and we have whatever the conferences look like, and we're going to say, all right, I think we got it right. We can just go from here for a long time.
That does not seem likely. The question I wanted to ask him, though, since I know he does a lot of thinking ahead in the book, is any of this reversible? Because right now it doesn't feel like any of it is. It feels like, to your point, we're kind of on this glide path towards bigger and quote unquote better. But there's also a scenario in which we end up a couple years in the future where all the teams are clumped together into a bunch of super conferences to the point where they become unmanageable and they have to fragment again.
Right.
And once again, we get regional pods, which are akin to the old conference structure that we saw in the past. I don't know how likely that is, but I think if we're being honest with the thought experiment, that is a possibility to at least consider. And would that restore regionality? Would that restore? Probably not. But again, for the purposes of the thought experiment, that was one thing that did come to mind as I was going through all this and just pondering the future of the sport.
Look, I am the prime example here of somebody who would love for nothing more than contraction and going back in certain elements, right? The regional aspect of the sport. Life moves forward, Ty. There's only one direction life moves. And so it's a matter of figuring out how to optimize what the sport can be, who the sport is for, what the core aspects, what the main thing is, and keeping the main thing. But there's no possible way we're going back to what it was. There could be, a division of the Big Ten and a division of the Big 12, and where it kind of has the feel.
The Western Front, right?
Right. You squint and it kind of looks like the Southwestern Conference. You squint and it looks like the Big 8, something like that. But there's no actual going back. And especially with the amount of money needed to run a major program or a middle of the road program or a medium-sized program, the money's got to come from somewhere. You can't just say we're going to go back to being, Boise's going to go back to the WAC, or, TCU is going to go back to the Mountain West because it was cooler, when we had all of this, regional elements. And TCU's obviously in the Big 12, so that's not the best example. But there's just, you can't turn the thing around.
No, you can't.
I think you just have to understand and be as thoughtful as possible about the changes, instead of saying, yeah, we're going to a playoff just because we think it would be cool, and this is the number we came up with, and this is the committee we came up with because it seems like it makes sense. And I think college football is going with the old Silicon Valley, move fast and break things. And you're just like, I don't know if that's a long-term solution.
They have broken stuff, that's for sure.
And Silicon Valley has broken a lot of stuff.
Yep.
But yeah, I don't know. It's why I choose to do a show like this, because I think we're like-minded in enough ways, even though you're a dirty expansionist. And having a guest on like Chuck to talk about, why we really appreciate this sport. And one of the things I was thinking about, because this is what I do, as surprising as it may be to some people, is, what's appealing about the sport that keeps me coming back, because it's changed so much. And I don't know if it's my number one thing. I don't know if it's my 9 thing, but there is something that the separating factor, a separating factor with college as opposed to the pro, is you get players who don't fit in a box who thrive. You get Travis Hunter in college football, and Travis Hunter goes to the NFL, and he's like, well, he's going to be a corner, right? Or, you get the players who's like, he's not really a running back, but he's not really a receiver, or he's not really a safety, he's not really a linebacker. And then once he gets to the NFL, he is this. And, there are exceptions, but finding Tavon Austin or Derwin James or Miles Jack or who Utah had Sione Vaki, right?
Yeah.
Those types of people who are Isaiah Simmons at Clemson, where you're like, it doesn't fit as like a this, but it like reminds me of like positionless basketball. And I kind of like that there's just a player who's too talented at too many things. So we're just going to figure it out. And you don't get that in the NFL. You don't get that in a lot of sports. There's a Shohei Ohtani, right, in the history of modern baseball. And I don't know. I really am always excited for the next version of that. And that's what college seems to deliver consistently.
Yeah, and in addition, there are a lot of guys like Diego Pavia.
Totally.
Guys like Diego Pavia who are undersized and, he may not want to hear this, but probably won't be an NFL quarterback for any extended period of time. But that doesn't take anything away from what he did at Vanderbilt or what he did at his previous stops before getting there. Mm-hmm. It is stuff like that, stories like that feed into the pageantry that I think we spoke about here with Chuck. So, again, a really quick read. If you like football, this is not an NFL book. This is not a college book. It's just a football book. Mm-hmm. If you're into the sport the way we are, we would encourage everybody to check it out. We'll make sure we post that link down in the description. And, pick it up, write in solidverbal@gmail.com. Let us know your thoughts.
Absolutely.
Dan Rubenstein, why don't we leave it there for now? We'll be back. Another episode coming up on Thursday. There is, of course, news swirling around college football. There always is. We'll do our part to keep you up to speed on that and much, much more. Again, verballers.com is where you can go if you want to directly support the nonsense that Dan and I are putting out there on a weekly basis. If nothing more, please hit follow. Please hit subscribe if you made it this far. We'd love to have you the rest of the way here this offseason.
Yeah. And by the way, and I don't mean for this to be a footnote on this episode, but just because it's timely and in the news, was absolutely gutted at the Rondale Moore news. Ugh. Absolutely gutted. And like the Purdue team that he was on with the Ohio State game, and like, he is not that, right? He is not only a former football player. He is not only a former Purdue player, whatever, but was a joy for me to watch as a football player. And the news from the weekend was just absolutely gutting. A total and complete tragedy. So sad to see it. Rondale Moore was just like one of the guys we loved in this sport. And
he was.
It hurts every time.
It's tough news. Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, why don't we call it a day?
No.
As I said, on Thursday, we will be back with another episode. We appreciate everybody hanging with us. And, of course, we appreciate Chuck Klosterman for giving us about an hour of his time today. We'll talk to you all soon, all right? In the meantime, for that guy over there, Dan, for myself, Ty, you know the drill. Stay solid.
Peace.